We're in for a great session. So I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask first, and they're going to be centered around the topic of Web3 and NFTs. So firstly, how many of you in this room, and I want to see a show of hands, are familiar or have heard of NFTs? That's a good number. We're going to put hands up again and ask a similar question. How many of you are familiar with Web3? How many of you are experts in Web3 or NFTs? Okay, well, don't worry, because we've got 3 experts here, and I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Marcus Sawyerr. I am the founder of EQ Community. I've spent the last 16 years in HR technology with companies like Career Builder, running digital transformation for the Adecco Group. And within our community, we focus on really bringing in diverse talent at mid to senior level. And within that talent, we have conversations. And one of the big conversations has been around Web3 and NFTs. So without further ado, I would love for our special guests to introduce themselves. So Cleve, if you'd like to start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cleve Mesidor. I work for the Blockchain Association. The Blockchain Association is the leading unified voice for the industry in Washington. We represent over 80 companies in Washington. Previously, I served in the Obama administration as a presidential appointee, which is when I first learned about Bitcoin. I've been in the crypto space for about 6 years, and believe it or not, this is my 3rd Web3 conversation in the span of less than 2 weeks. I spoke at a consumer bankers conference about Web3 and payments, and then just left South by Southwest to talk about Web3. So it's great to be here with HR professionals who absolutely should be thinking about the future of the decentralized future.
Thank you, Cleve. And Eiman, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Eiman Abdelmoneim. I lead dev success at a company called Thirdweb. I've been in technology for over 2 decades. I like to say at my company, I'm actually one of the older people. We're a very young company, but I'm one of the few people that's lived through Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Worked at startups in each one of those stages. Spent a long time in fintech and SaaS. Today, what I do is I work alongside companies and individuals across industries who are looking to implement Web3. We provide tools and developer tools as well as no-code components that really anybody makes Web3 very, very accessible. Work very, very closely with them from start to finish, defining their vision, mapping that to what's possible in Web3, and then really helping them kind of find success with that. So I have a front row seat, so I'm hoping to bring that front row seat perspective of what people are doing in Web3 to this conversation.
Thanks, Eiman. It's great to have you. And Lewis.
Good morning. I'm Lewis Wallicy. I am Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel of Tari Labs, which is the developer of a base layer blockchain protocol called Tari. It's being custom designed for the issuance of digital assets like NFTs. And we have an NFT product called Y.at, Y.at, which is an online emoji-based identity service you can purchase at our website. I have been, similar to Eiman, working in technology for over 20 years. Have done time at Web 1 companies, Web 2, spent a lot of time in social media, and now in Web 3 for the past 4 or so years. And I'm passionate about driving innovation and scaling disruptive technologies and products.
Thank you, Lewis. So those are the introductions. I think there's a bigger question in the room, and one of the big questions is what is Web 3? And also, I think what we want to accomplish during this session is giving you some takeaways to think about how you can maybe implement parts of Web 3 into your business. So we'll start by asking, what is your definition of Web 3?
I'll begin. Obviously, I work in the crypto space, so we have a pretty broad definition of Web3. So I would talk about it in terms of the internet, which we know and love and hate, right? So as Eiman was mentioning, right, we started with Web 1, and right now we're in Web 2. So when you look at what Web 3 could look like, the next iteration of the web, we're thinking of it from a decentralized perspective, leveraging blockchain technology, layering on artificial intelligence and machine learning. How do you create a much more authentic experience? So leveraging blockchain, you can use smart contracts to create secure peer-to-peer interactions. So all of those bots you hear about, so all the misinformation, you can actually course-correct for some of that. But also, we can leverage cryptocurrency to do microtransactions within Web3. And there's very elements of it. So we're layering on, NFTs, as you've spoken about, decentralized autonomous organizations, which is DAOs. Again, the whole point of being able to do microtransactions and raise money. And then there's even the Metaverse that you've heard about, which we're 10 years out from. But it is really, how do we create a more secure, decentralized environment where people can still socialize and engage, but we can also do business and do transactions. And then we can do it in a digital space that's secure and where we don't have to worry about privacy and identity breakdowns.
Sure. And Lewis, I see you nodding there, so you probably got some similar views. But what would your definition be? How would you describe?
Yeah, I would contrast Web3, to Web 2 and Web 1. Like Web 1, I look at it from who's the operator of the platform, and who's providing the content on the platform. So Web 1, that was the same party. Like the company that's running the website is the one that's like putting the content on the website. Web 2, social media, the rise of social networking. While the platforms are still operated by an organization or company, it's the users of the platform that are actually creating the content. And then you then contrast that to Web 3, where the platform itself is actually operated by the users, and the users are the ones that are directing the content for the platforms.
Yeah, got it. So we're talking a lot more about being decentralized, right? And Eiman, do you have a similar view or a different view? I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
I like what Lewis said. I've heard it expressed very concisely as Web 1 was read-only. Web 2 is read and write. Web 3 is read, write, and then own or transact. So I'd say, first of all, I'd definitely support that. The other thing I would just add to that, Marcus, is I would just say that now you're doing all of that and it is on a public database, which is the blockchain. Absolutely. Which in and of itself also creates a whole new dynamic as it relates to Web 3 and Web 2, not just in the openness of the data, but then now when you're in an environment where the data itself is open, this idea of the community itself using that data and building value on top of that data, it's all open. It's not within any gated walls. So that would be how what I would add to what Cleve and...
Like an extension of crowdsourcing, in fact, right? It's a new wave. So anybody can then, as you said, access that information and then build upon it. And we've had various conversations individually online, right, as we do in different platforms. And some of the topics that we've talked about have really been looking at the new generation and how the new generation is thinking about Web 3. I don't know, Lewis, if you want to touch on that a little bit more. You mentioned emojis, right? And you mentioned you run a business that has digital your identification is emojis. Tell the audience a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'll talk about why the younger generations are embracing Web3 to a higher level and at a faster pace than other generations. And I think there's a few things that go into it, and the social media kind of use of emojis is kind of exemplary of some, but there's as we all know, there's like a historic deficit of trust in organizations, governments, and what have you. Not gonna go into what has caused that. over the years, but we're at a low in terms of people's faith in institutions. For one, I think younger generations are naturally more digitally savvy than older generations. They've grown up with iPhones and Instagram and Venmo and and recognize how to utilize code and the internet and social media to build movements, create community, what have you. And then third, I think the rise of social media itself, which in many ways is Eiman and others have noted, gives rise to a reality where people are identifying themselves as being part of different groups, pushing forward different causes, hashtag culture, things of that nature, which is essentially like forming community naturally, through social media, which then when you segue into Web3, becomes an interesting component to how lots of these projects, whether they're NFT projects or blockchain protocols, cryptocurrency tokens, get built and thrive.
So you mentioned community quite a lot, and the new generation adopting community. What does that mean for the world of work, right? When we think about community in this new wave, and what do the HR leaders in this audience and whether it's the investors and entrepreneurs need to think about with that new generation?
Yeah, so obviously, some of you in this room may be thinking about it. We've seen that a lot of corporations, the private sector is thinking about Web3, how to integrate it from a business perspective. But I do think that, you need to start thinking about your workforce. The data shows that the greatest adoption of cryptocurrency right now is happening within Black and Latino communities by double digits. That means that your workforce, the working class people, middle class people, are engaged, right? And they will be looking to their employers to provide training so that they can expand on their skill set. And one of the things we've seen broadly, again, expanding a little bit beyond Web3, is that workers are wanting to get paid in cryptocurrency. Right. So skills training is a big part of Web3 and how we start thinking about it, because as we see the adoption, right? NFTs wasn't just a great thing for creators. Creators learned a new skill that they will now use to actually become owners and producers. So as your employees are thinking about this, as you're thinking about this, it can't just be about what is that business proposition, how do we create products and incorporate it. It's really how do we prepare the workforce, and how do we actually make this accessible to our workforce as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mentioned a little bit at the start, running digital transformation for a Fortune 500 company, part of that is you've got to bring people along the journey. As everybody knows here, now there's a new wave. What do you do? How do you educate those folks that are inside your organization? How do you give them access to the tools that they need, not only to be successful inside the organization, but we had this conversation, I think, earlier, which is there's a reputation aspect to it, there's a brand aspect to it. People expect companies to start to evolve into that. And so, Eiman, maybe you can talk a little bit about the brands that you're working with and what they're actually doing and how they're driving Web3.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I think NFTs kind of have a reputation right now. You've heard of Bored Apes, you've heard of punks. So it feels like, well, these are just JPEGs. And so there's sort of like, well, what is actually of value here? And I mentioned I'm on the front lines, and what I'm telling people, what I'm telling anyone who talks to me now is I say, I'm talking to really, really big brands now who are beginning to implement their Web3 strategies. And when we're talking about NFTs next year, it's going to be, the models in our heads are going to be completely different. I'll give one example that I find really, really compelling, because it has to do with sort of like how it's just being incorporated into the business model and into community building. It's a fashion brand in Europe that is looking, so what they do is they build sneakers, is what they do. They manufacture sneakers. So the idea that they have is that they will they want to fund sort of like the building of the next shoe that they're going to be doing. So we're going to drop NFTs that represent purchasing the sneaker. It's kind of step one. And that NFT is actually going to be just a bland NFT. That's not going to actually show what the actual sneaker is. Now, step two of their roadmap is the holders of those NFTs will be given governance to be able to vote on the style of the shoe that's going to be manufactured. These are almost deconstructing some of the things that you hear people talking about DAOs, and they say it's going to be this flat organization and everyone's an owner and everyone votes. Well, even just for community building, you can implement that primitive, which is governance, enforced by people who hold the token. So there's an ownership, a real ownership aspect of it. So now they will be able to vote on the sole, be able to vote on the color, and then they will be able to then redeem their initial NFT for the actual physical shoe, which will have also with it a digital version of the shoe tied by a QR code on the physical item. And so now there's both a physical sort of representation of the shoe that they can either wear or trade, as well as the digital version of it.
And I want to touch on that because I think it's really important to think about what you just said there. You actually started the conversation by talking about the fact that it's a fashion brand. Could be a retailer, could be a high street retailer.
Yeah.
So what my mind automatically goes to is when you're interacting with those individuals that's driving this project, who are those people? What are those roles that they have? Are they project managers? Are they blockchain engineers? Like, who inside these organizations needs to be taking ownership of these types of projects moving forward?
Well, in this particular case, it's actually a lot of the initiatives coming out of big brands right now is coming out of strategy or marketing.
Okay, got it.
Right? Those are really driving, and a big part of that is because you see NFTs right now very much is a cultural phenomenon.
Yep.
It's very much an association with brands and memes, right, within the general society and being a part of that conversation. So at least for now, right now, it's starting in strategy and marketing. Please.
And I was going to say, for those of you in the room who are thinking, oh my God, what are NFTs? Like, that sounds outside of you. Put it in the context of America's economy, like creative economies. Creative economies drive local cities. And when you think of how the boost that's been to our creative economies has been huge, and then even creators have made more money in the last 5 years than they've probably done in the last few decades. So the economic impact has been tremendous.
One of the things that I thought was fascinating about how companies are embracing NFTs are with the fashion brand in Europe that Eiman notes, they're already making physical products and translating a physical project into a digital item. It's a natural kind of thought. It's like Disney makes Mickey Mouse T-shirts and Mickey Mouse ears. The Mickey Mouse posters. Mickey Mouse NFTs, that's kind of a logical progression. But when I start seeing companies like Coca-Cola that issued NFTs last fall, and McDonald's issued NFTs to commemorate I don't know, like the 30th or 40th anniversary of the McRib, and Time Magazine is releasing NFTs. These are companies that aren't really making creative products that are for the market that would naturally lend themselves to new mediums like NFTs, and so that's what's really fascinating to me right now. Yeah,
it's similar to the digital transformation, right? I think everybody starts at a slightly different time and also in a different space, like headspace, depending on what their initiatives are. And I've got another question for the audience. How many of you, by a show of hands, inside your organization know that your company has experimented with NFTs? 2, 3. There's one at the back. So we got 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6. Okay. I think that, and I'm going to ask another question actually. How many of you, by show of hands, have gone through a digital transformation in your organization? Okay. We've got a few more hands, not that much more. Well, just to give you some examples and kind of think about what we were talking about when it comes to the retail piece inside EQ, for instance. I was spending this morning, I was having this discussion. I was spending this morning minting 20 NFTs, and part of me was thinking, why am I doing this? And what it reminded me of, it reminded me that we made a commitment and a promise that we were going to issue a certain amount of NFTs to our community, and the rationale behind that and the reasoning was really to develop the brand over a long time associated to the future of work. Yeah. So it wasn't to sell an NFT, flip it, and to make money, but it was to create some artifacts that are digital that can live on with our members and those people there. And we're in the recruiting industry. We help people find jobs, right? So I'm starting to see that creep into many other industries and kind of into a segue of what does this mean for the future of work when it comes to education, when it comes to new roles and new opportunities? Because I think that's a key area for this audience here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so when it comes to the future of work, education has to be a key part of it. I don't want to get too wonky, but the president just put out the executive order on cryptocurrencies, and the focus was competitiveness, innovation, right? That was a blueprint for our economic growth, and so when companies are looking at this, HR professionals, VCs, it's really thinking through that. How do we begin this conversation? Just so you know, no one has missed out. This is the starting point, not the finish line. So within the work that I do, there's an organization called the Internet Education Foundation. They've been leading a lot of the work on Web3 and providing some of that thought leadership. But it's also training. So many companies are really looking at how do they begin to look at certification programs for their employees, but also looking at white papers that look at how this is affecting their work stream, their work life. As I mentioned, what we're seeing is, industry leaders can no longer not pay attention because your workforce is paying attention, right? Your communities are paying attention. Your customers are paying attention. They're focused on Web3. They're leveraging DAOs, right? They want to know how the metaverse is going to impact them. And we're seeing even more and more job descriptions asking people for qualifications for the metaverse, for Web3. So the imperativeness of this is real. But if you look at it simply as just skills training, right? Yep. Just preparing people, preparing yourself, we would be able to compete.
Yeah, absolutely.
Innovation economy.
No, and I think you make a really, really interesting point about the expectations of the workforce. So, does everyone remember a time when your organization that you work for, their website was terrible, but then outside of that, you would have a consumer product that you would expect to be just as fast as your company's website, and then that starts to develop and evolve and change, and the expectations of the workforce drive a lot of that change as well. Eiman, you wanted to mention something.
I'd say when I think about the future of work, well, the future of work is here. So I have a confession to make. So when I joined Thirdweb, it's the first time in my career where I was actually the oldest person in the company. I'm in my late 40s, just in case you're wondering. And so it's the first time that I'm kind of have that view. A lot of Gen Z that I'm working with, if you want to know what the future of work looks like, all you have to do is look at your kids, if you have kids, even if they're young kids, and how they engage with things like Roblox or games. And there are economies in these games, and there are assets which are purely digital that only have value within those communities, yet are precious and people will pay real money for those things. There's a openness in those games. There's a build your own future in that game. So I just think that because of that, growing up sort of in that world, that just translates into an expectation now of how they want to work.
Absolutely.
And what their organization is like.
And can I chime in? I know that this is not what you meant, but we live in an economy where 4 generations dominated, right? You mentioned, the Zoomers, the high school and college students, but I'm a Gen Xer like you, and some people are Boomers. So we're actually having to build and prepare all generations, right? It is, that workforce is people in their 60s and in their 40s and their 50s that we now have a mandate to actually create products for, design for, as well as train to actually be able to create the architecture for this new innovation economy. So you're lucky to be in a space where there's all these young visionaries, but even when you're not, though, we still have to innovate for grandma, auntie, as well as, the high schooler.
Absolutely. Wow. So you were going to mention.
Just, when I think of the, future of work and, how Web3 fits in, I immediately, think of employee engagement as kind of, where, it can go. And, by that, I mean, you look at Web3 and what we've talked about so far is the power of community in, all of this. So, NFT communities that are deciding like what the next shoe design will be. There's in the Bitcoin, community, acronyms, HODL, like hold on for dear life, or WAG me, we're all going to make it, right? There's community that people are drawn to because they want this sense of belonging. And that's, that's what we all want for all of our employees. We don't want them to feel like they have a job. We want them to feel like, they are working as part of a team with a shared purpose, like they belong where they are. And so I think that, smart companies that find ways to embrace Web3 technology can kind of leverage, some of that sense of belonging and community in a very meaningful and powerful way.
That's really important. And obviously over the last couple of years, many of us have adapted our working styles. I'd actually be interested, again, just from an audience show of hands, how many of you are working remote still? Wow. I want to say that's 70 or 80%. So that sense of belonging, bringing that through, whether it's through brand or visual identity or having something that people feel like they've got a purpose around, is going to get more and more important, or it's going to become more and more important, should I say. Some of the things that I want to ensure that we cover at the end of this is, if you were sitting in a chief people officer seat or a head of talent acquisition seat, or you're an investor or an entrepreneur that was in the audience, and you know what you know now, what would you do, or how would you spend your time, right? And because we can kind of preach and say, hey, this is at high level, this is what's going on, it's really cool, you should get involved. But practically, what do I do after this session?
I'll start. I do a lot of work around women in blockchain and focus on women in blockchain. And I'll tell you, the crypto industry, $3 trillion value, we struggle with the same things that all of you do. Right now, the crypto industry is hiring, and we can't find people. Right? We all know that the greatest casualty of COVID were professional women. Professional women were forced out of the workforce. So there are people who are looking for virtual options because that provides the flexibility, but a creative option as well. They're looking for reset. And so we want women, people of color, professionals, people who want to do a second phase to think about innovation economies like Web3, right? Even artificial intelligence. So for me, if I were in that seat and I'm thinking through, I would think about, how do I create a different work environment, right? Virtual is a challenge for companies, definitely. But there's a way to actually use it for retention, that the folks who do want to leave, oftentimes we're finding out that they want more opportunities for innovations, to be visionary. Right? And within Web3, you can bring your skill set. No one has to get a different degree. A lot of the applications are drag and drop. It's really about for me, it would be stepping back and saying, how do I create a new narrative for the workforce and maintain and really retain women?
That's, and I want to just dive into that, because I think it's a really, really interesting point around not seeing remote work as a way to, I suppose, just change the culture you're going to lose, but it's a huge opportunity, right? And one of the things that we've seen just in our organization is you give people opportunities to do new projects or innovative things inside the organization, and they might take it on as a side project, and you'll be surprised what they can deliver, right? And then that drives retention, and we talk again about that sense of belonging. So I think that's a great point, Cleve. So yeah, really appreciate you sharing that.
So I was asked this question by a senior executive at a major streaming platform. Like, why do I need blockchain for this? Like, why do I need Web3 for this? And what I would just offer is that there's something inherently human about owning something that is just a little bit different. Like the example I gave, which was, hey, you're going to have people who are going to have governance and they're going to vote for the shoe. You could argue and say, well, that could have just been a poll that a company could have just thrown onto a website and said, hey, fans of whatever, can, vote for the next shoe. It's quite another thing when you're saying, no, you as an owner, as invested in this community now, we are ceding this control and we're offering and opening up this control. So I would kind of note that point, which and also offer that this is all around us in many different ways. And what I mean by that is I just mean that there are, all an NFT is essentially a way to create a digital collectible that is publicly verifiable as being from a particular source. That's it. That's what it is, okay? But there are a lot of things that, like, in the physical world represent that. So I would, suggest thinking about that. And the advice I give everybody is, like, you can read about this. You can hear people like us wax eloquent or not so eloquent about it. But the best way is to dive into it. There is a lot of stuff that is like NBA Top Shot. If you're an NBA fan, check it out. The San Antonio Spurs just released something. Coach Pop just became the most, winningest coach. They had an NFT drop that dropped on Monday that was nothing more than you could have a collectible of one of his plays, one of his famous plays. And that they'll give you, in the real world with the owner of that NFT, they'll give you a signed copy of that.
I'll give you another example. Yeah. EQ is dropping their NFT today, and we're dropping NFTs for the future of work. So anybody who wants to check those out, you can check those out. And you can have a look and see what we're talking about as well. But I think those are fantastic examples. You've got to dive in, right?
You got to dive in.
And you've got to start somewhere and really immerse yourself in anything. Otherwise, you're just not going to learn, right? Lewis, is there?
Yeah, I mean, an interesting stat. So about 1/3 of people in the U.S. Between the ages of 18 and 29 own cryptocurrency. So a third of the future workforce, existing workforce, and future, owns crypto, and they do so often because the values that circle the various communities of the projects that they've invested in. And so I think meeting your employees where they are, recognizing what their interests are, why they're so interested in supporting Web3, and exhibiting awareness so that they see that you're paying attention to the trends, whether you dabble in NFTs or paying employees partially in Bitcoin or whatever you may choose to do as an organization. I think you get credit just for the awareness and communicating that you're paying attention to this.
Oh, perfect. Well, we're less than a minute left, so I want to thank you all for joining us today. In terms of the takeaways, it seems like we've got some really clear ones. Make sure you dive in. You will get credit if you have a sense of awareness. And there's so much information out there, so you can go and educate yourself. We'll be around for the rest of the day. We've actually got a special lunchtime session at 12:30 in the Borough Suite, so Cleve will be there as well. And Cleve won't say this, but she's a coveted author as well, and there'll be some books there as well, so specifically focused on the blockchain. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen, and really appreciate everyone.